Good morning. We are all muted as we begin our service together. Let's listen to the prelude from our music director, David Chapman. The sun is rising, a new day begun. Words and music from First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville Youth Choir, arranged by Jay Shelton. Good morning to all on this special 4th of July Sunday service. A special hello to any visitors this morning. I am Polly Pettit, your worship associate. My pronouns are she, her. I'm part of a team that works with the minister, service leaders, and staff to craft and produce our worship services. We strive to be a welcoming congregation. Our families have come from different countries. Among us, we have a range of sexualities, of shapes and sizes, and physical abilities. We come from different religious backgrounds and philosophies. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, we are so glad you chose to be here this morning. And speaking of here, we acknowledge that the land where our church building stands is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who settled this region thousands of years ago. Whatever brought you online this morning, welcome to our worship service. We are recording on Facebook Live and Zoom. We also have a YouTube channel, and your subscription will unlock some additional features for us if you can, and you can view past services there too. Please use the link in the chat if you want to subscribe. And now, if you haven't already, please post in chat the number of people viewing from your screen this morning. We'd love to have you participate from your home in singing, sharing in chalice lighting, and sharing joys and sorrows in the chat. Just remember to remain muted unless you're part of the service. If you are visiting or you would just like to get to know us better, please send your contact information to engagement@pbuuc.org. And now Reverend Strauss will call us to worship.
Thank you, Polly, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you on this beautiful morning. I want to call us to worship in a spirit of prayer. So please sit comfortably, take a few deep and relaxing breaths. Feel into the spiritual part of yourself and let it shine. We call upon the Spirit of life and love. We call upon the God of many names and the holiness that surrounds us in nature. We call on all that is holy to be with us and to guide us this morning. We gather on this holy ground made sacred by all those who have come before us to the doors of the Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church. We come here thirsty and hungry for meaning and for hope. We come seeking a way of truth and reconciliation in all things. We come celebrating the founding aspirations and dreams of our nation, acknowledging that they remain unfulfilled. May we be among those who do not rest until freedom comes for all. May we be among those who do not rest until justice comes for all. May we be among those who still believe that love will win the day. May our words and actions be both witness and blessing, now and into the remainder of this day. Let us be together in a celebration of life. And I invite you now to unmute for a moment to say hello to one another and then to remute, and be sure and look to the second page. Make sure you don't miss anyone to greet. Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Glad you're
Good morning.
here.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
All right, now you may remute.
Lynn, you muted you.
Did what I told myself to do. Great, I'm back. And now I invite Carol Carter Walker to light our chalice. Carol is a longtime active member at Paint Branch and currently a member of the Board of Trustees. Carol.
Good morning. Please join me in the communal lighting of our chalice and in the unison chalice lighting. We light the chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open mind, the helping hands, the loving heart, and the radiant spirit. Encendamos este cáliz para celebrar el unitarismo universalismo. Esta la iglesia de la mente abierta, de las manos amigas, del amor del corazón y del espíritu radiante.
Thank you, Carol. Now, please join in singing our opening hymn, number 159, This Is My Song.
Good morning, my good people. I'm Chris McCann, your religious educator, and I'm struggling to get my papers held. My pronouns are she and her. This morning, I'd like to share with you the poem, The Hill We Climb, written and recited by Amanda Gorman at the presidential inauguration. As we hear these words, let us envision the ways that we at Paint Branch, individually and collectively, might bring them to life. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gaze, not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious. Not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption we feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe, now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation, become the future. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. Every breath from a bronze pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the golden hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. and every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our people diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn balloons as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Amanda. I'm bringing to you another poem this morning. Denise Levertov wrote this poem, Making Peace, in 1987. She was born in 1923 and came of age in an England ravaged by World War II. Resistance to war is a strong theme in her poetry. She's renowned for the social conscience reflected in her work, but she also wrote love poems and lyrical poems about the natural world. I like this poem because it ties our deeply personal actions of the here and now to the universal concept of peace. As a historical film researcher, I've spent my entire work life looking at the past. I've worked on hundreds of films analyzing war, its causes, its horrors, its legacies, its warnings to never let it happen again. I'm gratified to have done something to bear witness to history, but it is often more than I can absorb. Wars seem to be everywhere and never ending. One may be tamped down only to be replaced by another and another. How can I not feel powerless to make it stop? I like this poem because it flips the perspective from being overwhelmed by the searing images of war to envisioning the possibility of peace. I have to imagine peace. I have to give it power by living a life that constructs it. Levertov likens peace to a poem and anoints us all as poets. We are writing the poem of peace as we live our lives in the present, one stanza at a time. Peace happens now, strengthened by all the decisions we make and actions we take. We have to find for ourselves what peace is in our own lives. We can experiment, we can wait through long pauses. I dare say we can make mistakes and try again. This poem helps me diffuse the crushing defeats, not only of armed conflict, but of the cruelty, injustice, and chaos everywhere. We are armed with vibrations of light, like an open mind, helping hands, and radiant spirit. Here is the poem, Making Peace by Denise Levertov. A voice from the dark called out, the poets must give us imagination of peace to oust the intense, familiar imagination of disaster. Peace, not only the absence of war, but peace, like a poem, is not there ahead of itself. Can't be imagined before it is made. Excuse me. Can't be known except in the words of its making, grammar of justice, syntax of mutual aid, a feeling towards it, dimly sensing a rhythm is all we have until we begin to utter its metaphors, learning them as we speak. A line of peace might appear if we restructured the sentence of our lives. Our lives are making, revoked its affirmation of profit and power, questioned our needs, allowed long pauses. A cadence of peace might balance its weight on that different fulcrum, peace, a presence, an energy field more intense than war, might pulse then, stanza by stanza, into the world, each act of living, one of its words, each word, a vibration of light, facets of the forming crystal.
Thank you so much, Polly and Chris. As we move into the section of our service where we share our joys and sorrows, I have a sorrow to share on behalf of the congregation. The sad news is that our beloved Meg Wah died last week. Meg died on June 30th. She fell ill for only a month or so. She had been quite well up till then. She was 96 and a half years old. There is at this moment no gathering planned or memorial planned. Meg was an active member and a presence for a lot of what went on at Paint Branch. I've heard stories of her, especially around the children in the religious education program. So I did reach out to her daughter-in-law, Louise, and the pastoral care team has also reached out. We send condolences and love to the family. Meg will be missed, but we will carry her in our hearts and remember her and her love. Jim?
Thanks, Reverend Lynn. My name is Jim Flaherty, a member of Pastoral Care Associates. During every Sunday service, we reserve time for the sharing of joys and sorrows in the congregation. A reminder to all, if you want to be in touch with Reverend Lynn Strauss for pastoral counseling or a member of the pastoral care team, you can find our contact information posted now in the chat. For the sharing today, you may want to reflect on words from others that have moved you, or you may choose to narrow the focus to more immediate issues affecting you as an individual, as a family, or as a community. If there is a particular success achieved or a loss suffered, you may want to bring that to the congregation. Please use the chat now to share your joys and sorrows during the playing of the intonation. And for our intonation music, David Chapman will play Peace, the Perfect Word, from the Southern Harmony, 1835. Words by Odell Shepard. Thank you, David. Let's pause now for about 30 seconds for meditation or silent reflection as we acknowledge all that has been shared, as well as those joys and sorrows which were not expressed at this time. May we hold one another in love and kindness, so that this congregation may be a source of strength and comfort, courage and hope in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you, David, for that beautiful piece of music. Thank you, Jim, for leading us to our hearts. And now to lead us to action for justice and to recommitment to the work ahead, we will listen to Sweet Honey in the Rock sing Ella's song, a beautiful and rousing piece.
We have traveled a long way this evening to be here, and we are grateful that we are able to sing these songs, voicing how we feel about the things that we see in life. And we think that it's very important to maintain freedom. So we say, we who believe in freedom, we cannot rest. We cannot be complacent. We may stay alert, stay active, and stay involved. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
Oh, how can you rest?
We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers, sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers, sons. Sing with us. We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
Oh, how can you rest?
We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. The older I get, the better I know that the secret to my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young dare to run against the storm. Not needing to clutch for power, not needing for the light just to shine on me. I need to be one in the number as we stand against tyranny. But now we who believe in freedom cannot rest.
Don't you rest?
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. You know that struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I come to realize that teaching others to stand up and fight is the only way my struggle survives. I'm a woman who speaks in a voice, and I must be heard. At times I can be quite difficult, about to no man's word. You know that we who believe in freedom cannot rest.
Oh, don't you
We
rest?
who believe in freedom cannot rest until one more time now. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. Do
Oh, don't you wish we were together and we could all stand up and dance and shout and sing along together? Just wonderful. It's one of the best things about moving to Washington is to be in the same place frequently with Sweet Honey in the Rock. Wow, what an honor. I often need the inspiration of a strong hymn before preaching. And when we had to go to remote, I was worried that I would have trouble because I would always go to the sanctuary before people arrived for the service when the choir would come in early to rehearse. And I would sit in the back and just absorb the rehearsal. And then I would have that already in my body to take with me at the start of the service and to carry me through. So I'm so grateful that our tech folks made sure that we were able to share this music together. So many things were swirling through my head and heart as I sat down to write this sermon, and they're still swirling. We believe in freedom, we work for freedom, we work for justice, but we're not there. I focused in after sort of ruminating and moving from one issue area to another. I focused in on something that touches me because of my own life experience, and combine some things that are so important right now in our nation. What is freedom and who gets it? Why do Black Lives matter? How can we be the country in all of the Western world, in all the world, I think, that has the most people in prison? And how can the right to vote be under attack again? So yeah, that's a lot to think about. So in addition to music, I sometimes turn to the Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Isaiah brings good news to the people of Zion. In Isaiah chapter 61, it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners." Let us witness this morning to the truth of our criminal injustice system. Let us hold in our hearts the millions of families in this country who suffer from the cruelty and inequality of our prison system. In the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, it is written, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These high principles to which our country has aspired and laid out in the Declaration have not been fully upheld. This we know. Rights have been denied. This we know. Suppression of the right to vote is gaining a stranglehold once again. And there is a particular kind of voter suppression for those incarcerated people who, when they leave prison after serving their sentence, are still denied the right to vote, or have been, or are in some places, but not in others. Justice requires that we do not look away from the truth. As people of courage, we are called to hold hope and pride in our country in one hand, and the sorrow and shame of our country in the other, because both are true. Some among us of white privilege, we of middle class and educational and vocational privilege, We of many blessings have held tenaciously to the dream and aspiration fed to us within the myth of American exceptionalism. We know it to be a myth. It seemed easier that way. However, it seemed okay. It even seemed patriotic. But there are among us, loved ones among us, who have always known the narrative of suffering, sorrow, and shame. They learned by their particular American experience of systemic racism, white supremacy, patriarchy, poverty of land and food and jobs. They learned amid the silence of those who looked away. There is more to know than the exceptionalism story of America. This we know. There is more to teach our children, and more for our children to teach us. This we know. President Abraham Lincoln, reflecting on the Declaration of Independence as a statement of principles, which though not legally binding, are powerful. He called those words within the Declaration a rebuke and a stumbling block to tyranny and oppression. He called those words a rebuke that continued to inspire people around the world to fight for freedom and equality. So imagine for a moment that we're all together in the sanctuary at Paint Branch. Imagine for a moment that visitors have come in the door from the past. Think of someone that you wish would be with us on this July 4th. Imagine President Lincoln might be here, Frederick Douglass, the spirit of Harriet Tubman, the voice of Langston Hughes, the everlasting wisdom of Howard Thurman, the hope and creativity of Denise Levertov, the Unitarian Universalist minister James Reeb, who did his internship at All Souls, Washington, writer Toni Morrison. Imagine all the ancestors who have not looked away from the truth of both Americas. John Lewis, even Stacey Abrams might be here as she was at GA. Imagine those who have inspired courage and fortitude in you. Imagine they are here now, here in spirit, for prophets come in every generation, and they always come for freedom, and they are always with us. They knew, even then in their time, our ancestors knew, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. I am so grateful for Sweet Honey in the Rock and for Ella's song. Ella Baker was a great organizer and activist. In 1957, she moved to Atlanta to help Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Bayard Rustin organize the Southern Christian Leadership Council, SCLC. She ran the voter registration project of the NAACP, the Crusade for Citizenship, as it was called. She traveled throughout the South to fight for school integration. And she organized student activists across the country in 1960 and thereby formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee known as SNCC, who then became the Freedom Riders. Ella knew and taught others to know, we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. And freedom has not yet come to all of America. The January 6th violent insurrection, that mob of myth-believing Americans who invaded the Capitol of the United States of America and threatened the lives of our elected senators and congressmen and women, who caused the death of some and the fear of many. Their violence and hubris on that day reminds us that we cannot look away. Just as we learned from the murder of George Floyd just 1 year ago, we must witness to the shame and sorrow of our country's failings. Again and again, we must witness with our voices and our bodies, our minds and our spirits. Perhaps all of us have a freedom story to tell. Perhaps you've told yours before. I will tell you a part of mine. I cannot rest from justice work because I cannot turn away from my brother, who was my closest childhood friend. As a young teenager of 14, living in a rough urban neighborhood, my brother was imprisoned first by heroin and booze, from which he never freed himself, never got free of his addiction. So soon and more than once, he was sentenced to prison. I was also a teenager when he was first sent away. We were just 11 months apart in age. The cruelty of the system was felt by our entire family. We all suffered. Visitation procedures were humiliating. Phone calls were extremely expensive and difficult. Any letter I sent my brother was read and stamped by strangers. And we had to keep it all a secret in those days. We had to keep the secrets for years. And his child, who came to be born, well, his child suffered the most. Her life was marred by his, and now his grandchildren also. There is a history of cruel and unusual punishment cemented into our legal and our prison systems. If all of us who have loved someone through a trial or a prison sentence and waited for them to walk out of those gates, as I did, if all of us who have enjoyed the freedoms that we assume to be our rights, and yet know that to others, they are held out only as a privilege to be earned or lost, if all of us just couldn't rest until everyone was free, perhaps then a 4th of July celebration might have greater integrity and meaning. Ella Baker said of her organizing goal, and I quote, "The major job was getting people to understand that they had something within their power, that they could use, and it could only be used if they understood what was happening and how group action could counter violence." As long as my family and I had to keep the secret, we couldn't get any help. We couldn't counter the violence. Our power to do justice can only be used if we understand what is really happening. If we don't look away, we can be useful only if we look squarely at the violence of the prison system, at the racial bias and the abuse of power handed down from 1607 in Jamestown, Virginia, to Minneapolis in 2020, and to this very morning. Voter disenfranchisement strikes at the very heart of democracy. Historically speaking, suppression of the right to vote is fairly new in America because for the first 200 years of our democracy, very few people were granted the privilege to vote at all. Not women, not people of color, not the mentally ill, not slaves, not the poor. Only white men of property were given the privilege of voting. That is, unless they were accused of a crime and found guilty. I asked a friend of mine, a civil liberties lawyer, if she could point me to information on the voting rights of citizens who have been incarcerated for felony convictions, but have served their sentence and may be released or may be on parole. These men and women today are not known as ex-cons. They are known as returning citizens. She sent me a link to a nonpartisan website called procon.org. And it's the United States history of felon voting and disenfranchisement. America inherited non-democratic systems of government from ancient cultures. This history of felon voting actually starts in 1100 BC. So it goes in chunks, historical chunks. And the first one is 1100 BC to 17th century. During that entire time, starting in ancient Athens, Rome, and medieval Europe, punishment for crime was called civil death. Tell it like it is. Citizenship was stripped away, all property confiscated, and in some eras, banishment was enforced. All human rights were lost. In 1607, these draconian English laws were transplanted to the Jamestown settlement, carrying the same level of cruel punishment. Between 1764 and 1776, there was vigorous debate on whether voting was a right or a privilege. Colonial voting rights varied from colony to colony and were unevenly applied. The state controlled the decision whether or not to offer the privilege of the vote. If voting rights were to be deemed a natural right rather than a privilege, then everyone would have to have it, including women and slaves. And so they stayed away from that and continued the debate. In 1777, with the writing of the Articles of Confederation, the link was made between state suffrage laws and federal elections. Citizenship then was actually divorced from the right to vote. You could be a citizen, but that didn't necessarily mean you could vote. Each state continued to control who could vote and who could not. In 1792, Kentucky became the first state to establish criminal disenfranchisement, followed quickly by Vermont, Ohio, and in 1802, that was in 1802. Anyway, state after state after state followed Kentucky's example of disenfranchising criminals. In 1851, Maryland wrote disenfranchisement into its state constitution. During Reconstruction in 1870, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States extended the right to vote to former slaves. Section 1 reads, Section 1 reads, the right of citizens of the U.S. to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Section 2 reads, the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. That was 1870, but it wasn't long before Jim Crow replaced Reconstruction. and the 15th Amendment was barely enforced and all but forgotten in many states. In 1901, Alabama again wrote disqualification of people convicted of infamous crime of the right to vote. And in that writing, in their state constitution, they wrote in order to establish white supremacy. From 1901 to 1957, while state by state decided on the status of criminals and the vote, some states set up additional barriers of literacy tests, limited polling sites in Black neighborhoods, intimidation and violence to keep Black people from voting, whether criminal or not. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, signed by President Eisenhower, finally gave the states authority to actually bring lawsuits on behalf of those prevented from exercising their vote. And in 1965, Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. Still, the courts argued on and on about whether racial discrimination was done with intent or could be ignored. In the latter part of the 20th century, the rights of felons to vote was given and taken away again and again in state after state. The issues of fines and fees were often used as an excuse to take the vote away and to keep it. You may not know that when people are incarcerated, they are charged fees and fines that they are expected to pay after years and years of being in prison, unable to work or get a paycheck. How are they going to pay the fines? Some states granted voting rights to returning citizens before the end of parole, and some did not. Louisiana mandated a 5-year wait after the end of parole before a returning citizen could vote. Little of this back and forth of an American civil and human rights struggle around voting rights drew public notice, even as the number of men and women, especially men, especially Black men, were incarcerated in prisons by the thousands and then millions. It just grew and grew during our lifetime. It surprised me to be reminded of this history of felon disenfranchisement when last year, on September 22nd, 2020, Snoop Dogg and Mike Tyson held a joint press conference celebrating the fact of their first time to vote for President of the United States, because both were formerly incarcerated men of color. Ella Baker said that once people understood what was happening, then they could use their power, the power within themselves, their strengths, talents, and wisdom to take group action. Poet Denise Levertov wrote, "We are armed with vibrations of light, and together those vibrations begin to form something new and beautiful that she calls the facets of a crystal." So as we have used our imagination to think of who might be present with us, as we have thought about what we might know about freedom, imagine now the facets of a crystal and paintbranch being one. And let us cast the power of our light for a new freedom. And may that light of freedom reverberate in every prison cell, bringing hope, in every hall of justice, in every courtroom, in every classroom, in every neighborhood where drugs and crime find entry, in every home where secrets are kept, in every heart that is broken. We are part of the crystal of peace and freedom, and we pray that it will grow bright enough to bring light and hope to every dark corner of this nation. We who love dignity and worth of every person cannot rest until dignity and freedom come to all of our citizens. May peace bless you today. May your freedom be well enjoyed on this 4th of July. Amen. Blessed be. And now I would ask you, if I could, to stand and sing together with heart and soul the Black National Anthem, number 149 in our gray hymn book, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And the words are in the chat as well. Lift every voice.
The mission of this church carries on in these times of transition and hope, and is more important than ever. We are so grateful to have the financial support of our members and friends. Please give as generously as you are able. This Sunday's offering can be received as indicated in the chat bar. You can make online donations through Breeze or by text, and you can still mail donations to the church office. David will now play music entitled An American Hymn by Lee Holdridge, which is the main theme song of the television miniseries East of Eden.
Thank you, David. We cry the most tears for those we love the most and for what we love the most. And so we cry tears because we love our country. And we will not rest until we fulfill the aspirations that our founders set down. And we know that the generations to follow us, our sons and daughters, our grandchildren, nieces, nephews, those we can imagine playing in the glen. We love them, and they too will love this country into freedom. May it be so. Let us close with the singing of Spirit of Life. And please go forth to enjoy your day.
A battle lost or won is easily described, understood, and appreciated. But the moral growth of a great nation requires reflection as well as observation to appreciate it. Frederick Douglass.